Well, it's great to have you here. The subject of this webinar is an introduction to outsourced sales operations. And this is the first and the only webinar we've created that consists of a pitch, an unapologetic pitch for our services or the services of Ballistix. And what I want to do in this webinar is introduce you to our outsourced sales operations service. Now, so on the agenda, we have a few things. We're going to start with an overview of our approach to sales process design. And I'm going to do this in a slightly unusual way. What I'm going to do, or an uncommon way for us anyway, is I'm going to contrast the design of two sales functions, a typical sales function and a sales function that we build. And maybe an easier way to think about this or to process this is to think of it as a before and after example, where the first organization I introduce you to is the before and the second organization is the after. And then what I'm going to do is profile our service offering as promised, and after that I'll show you how to evaluate the economics of our offering. You know, does it make sense, and what's the net cost for you after some of the savings you're almost certainly going to make. And as we go, I'm going to hope that I can provide a few tips for do-it-yourselfers, and I'm sure that I can. On the subject of do-it-yourselfers, I'm a huge fan of them. I encourage them ever since I started the business 20 years ago. We've had, in the various guises of Ballistix, we've had people who follow us along and implement themselves, either because they're too small to afford our services or because they just like doing things themselves. Now, as proof of the fact that we celebrate the success of our do-it-yourselfers, it's worth taking a look after this webinar, not now, at my latest blog post, which happens to be a video interview with a company called Arca in the States here. It's an interview with just a great guy called Kirk Nelson, who works for Arca, and who in the last 12 months has just about doubled his organization's revenues. Now, the interesting thing about Kirk is that Arca, him and the team at Arca, have achieved this without any hands-on involvement from Ballistix. So sure, they read the book, attended webinars, and they did have me go and run an initial 2-day solution design workshop in the beginning to help them map out the end state. But they have done all of the transition by themselves with no assistance from Ballistix. So the reason I'm telling you this is to make it clear that even though I'm here today to pitch our outsourced sales operations service, I want you to understand that it is possible for you to achieve the end state that we're talking about without our assistance. And I think, if anything, in those cases where there is a good case for our assistance, the fact that it's possible for organizations to do it by themselves, and there's proof of that, makes the idea of moving forward all the more appealing. So let's get going. I want to introduce you to two organizations. The first one we'll call Alpha, the second one we'll call Bravo. Or, like I said, you might think of Alpha as before and Bravo as after. Now, Alpha is an organization pretty representative of the firms that we tend to find ourselves working with in Australia, in the UK, and here in the US. The firm has a head office and a few branch offices. And the head office, along with all of the branch offices, has sales functions that look roughly the same. In each case, we have 2 field reps, 2 customer service reps, a general manager who, because of the small size of the field office, is essentially operating as a sales manager, albeit a sales manager with a pretty damn small team. Now, head office, in addition to the same configuration as the regional locations, also has a marketing specialist. So a typical organization, Alpha, looks like this. By the way, if this is kind of small, top right-hand side, there's a button that says full screen. Click that, and you'll be surprised that it actually goes to full screen. Also, the window that contains the slide, you have the option to send that to full screen over the top of the other windows as well. If you get sick of looking at my face, you can do that and leave it there. So here's a visual representation of Alpha's sales function. So we have head office here at the top. We actually have a VP of sales responsible for all of the sales effort everywhere. But aside from that, we have the same basic resources as in each of the locations: 2 customer service reps and 2 salespeople. So this is very much a cellular approach to the design of the sales function, and it's an approach that we rail against, and it's an approach that we get great pleasure in undoing whenever we get an opportunity to do it. And to To discover why I would say a strange thing like that, it's necessary for us to have a look at necessary for us to peel back the covers, I guess, and to have a look at what the sales operations actually looks like underneath. So here's what you're likely to find when you look at alpha a little bit closer, if alpha is typical. You're going to find a scary small number of meaningful selling conversations occurring every week. You're going to discover that those field representatives, both in the head office and in regional locations, perform an average of a couple of true business development appointments a week each. That is standard. It doesn't matter which industry we're talking about, and it doesn't matter what continent we're in. The average that we find, not the goal, but the actual number of true business development appointments field salespeople perform is 2 a week. Now, we exclude from that what you could call account management appointments, or what I would call appointments associated with a milk run. In other words, where a rep cruises around in a company car, visits existing accounts in the hopes that they will scoop up an order. That is hardly selling, and it really doesn't do us any favors to represent it as such. Now, I know what you're thinking. These reps are probably doing some telephone work as well. So sure, they're on the phone, they're making calls, and among some of those calls, there are some meaningful selling conversations. So I'm assuming here that each of those reps is having about 15 meaningful conversations a week on the telephone, in addition to the ones in the field. Now, in my experience counting this, this is fairly generous, but we'll let it stand. Nonetheless, as I said at the outset, it's not a huge amount of activity for all the cost associated with all of those people and all of those offices. Now, but it's typical. It really is typical. Let me just clear those statuses. I'm assuming you're not asking a question. If you are asking the question, just type it in the chat window. If we have room for question time afterwards, you put up your hand then, and I will give you audio. But until then, if you have a question, just put it in chat. If it's relevant to what I'm talking about at that particular point in time, I'll answer it. If not, I'll loop back and get it at the end. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about alpha. They have minimal growth. You can probably formulate your own hypothesis as to why that might be. They have poor on-time performance and poor margins, and they have conflict between head office and regions, and actually they have conflict between sales and production at a more fundamental level. Now, the reason for these last 3 issues, these ones here, is that the design of the alpha sales model is resulting in balkanization, or the development of silos. So we have a division forming between sales and production, and we also have divisions forming between head office and each of the regions. And I'm sure if you've worked in an organization that's become regionalized over time, you will be aware of exactly what that conflict looks like. But the conflict exists to the detriment of customers, and it exists to the detriment of the fundamentals of the organization. Almost certainly Alpha invests thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars in sales training every year, and probably at some point in the last 5 years, they've invested $100,000 or more in a CRM in an effort to try and jumpstart growth, but they've probably been disappointed. They've probably been maintaining a pretty flat sales performance for the last 5 years or so, if Alpha is a typical organization. So kind of depressing. But what I'd like to do now is to introduce Bravo. And Bravo is an organization that has designed their sales function along the lines that we advocate, or perhaps an organization that started off like Bravo and re-engineered themselves. So some notable differences. Bravo has no branch offices, none. They have one physical location. So whatever country they're in, they have just one location. If they operate in multiple countries, they might have one location per continent, or they might not. But here at Ballistix, we're an example of an organization that operates on 3 continents and has one physical location. So it's not necessary that every country requires its own office. It's definitely not necessary that every state or every city requires its own office. Bravo has 2 national enterprise class salespeople. It doesn't matter where they live, but they are attached to the national office, and they must be, of course, because there are no branch offices. Each of those 2 salespeople has his or her own dedicated executive assistant. And those executive assistants own all of the field salespeople's calendars and all of the opportunities that the field salespeople are prosecuting, or involved with the prosecution of, I should say. In addition to the 2 salespeople and 2 executive assistants, there are 6 customer service reps, including 2 specialists. There are 3 inside salespeople, and there are 2 full-time research analysts. There are also 2 tech leaders. So the Bravo model looks like this. There are no more regional offices. We have this big central team. We have a VP of sales who's now responsible for the entire sales function that includes marketing and what I'm calling internal sales. The internal sales is this group of people here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people. So a decent sized internal team. The internal team consists of inside sales, the 2 executives who plan field reps' calendars, research analysts, and 6 customer service reps. Also, there's marketing, as we've discussed before. So let me give you a brief introduction to each of these people. Inside salespeople are individuals with the same caliber, both technical and sales, where technical and sales capabilities are concerned, as the previous field representatives. The difference is that these inside salespeople work, as their name suggests, inside. So instead of getting in a car and cruising around in the suburbs, they sit with a headset on in front of CRM, talking to customers on the phone. And if they need to demonstrate something, then they do it using web conferencing or Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever. The 2 executive assistants manage the calendars of the 2 national field reps, and those field reps are traveling all over the continent, regardless of where their appointments are, and they're exploiting the fact that when field meetings are genuinely required, at least those that are associated with sales, in most cases there are longer allowable lead times, particularly complex sales. Now, over here we have 2 project leaders. For those of you who've read our material, you'll know that in technical sales environments, and only in technical sales environments, it makes sense to have, a couple of engineers who straddle inside and outside, and who exist to assist field reps by looking after the technical conversation and allowing field reps to focus on the commercial conversation. So the reason why we have the project leadership role in those situations where we genuinely need it is to avoid salespeople getting entangled in sales opportunities and in fact transactions as they otherwise will. So back to the internal team, we have 2 research analysts who are responsible for building out the house list. So they're doing the Google and telephone research required to map the house list and to generate the lists that marketing is going to use to generate sales opportunities. And then we have a team of 6 customer service reps. And as you saw previously, we have 2 specialists on that team. We have a specialist proposal person, and we have a specialist order entry person. So this is what Alpha would look like after we were done with it, if we were allowed to get our grubby little mitts on Alpha. So obviously what I'm saying here is if you were interested in going down the route that SPE represents, the alternative to what I call the go-get-in-tiger approach, then this is probably the end state or something like the end state that you would end up with. By the way, the color codes here represent the income brackets of those various resources. Obviously, internal team members, assuming the same level of capability, cost less, sometimes quite a bit less than field representatives. And certainly they cost much less when you take into account the on-costs associated with field reps, like expense accounts and company cars and so on. So now let's peel back the sheets and have a look at the sales operations. So some major changes. Number 1, all accounts are owned by the customer service team. By account ownership, I mean, no, really, the accounts are owned by the organization as a whole. But I think what we mean when we talk about account ownership is who's the primary point of contact. And because in most cases, the most frequent conversations are relating to new or existing orders, and because most of the orders are fairly simple because they're repeats or consumables or whatever the case is, we want customers' primary relationship to be with members of the customer service team. So the CSRs own accounts. All opportunities are owned either by inside salespeople, I should say, or by salespeople, executive assistants. No opportunities are owned by anyone out there in the field. So everything is centrally owned. If you're a field salesperson in this model, you do not own opportunities. You own simply the activities that get allocated to your calendar, which obviously are activities that revolve around high-value, important face-to-face conversations with potential customers. So the major change, and the one that we're most interested in, is the change in the volume of meaningful sales conversations. Now, I used to talk about the volume of appointments, but increasingly, particularly as a consequence of all the work that we're doing here in the States, we've recognized just how important inside sales teams are. And we've recognized that there's an enormous range of selling situations and industries where it is actually possible to sell on the telephone. And of course, this presentation here today is an example of the fact that it may even be possible to sell highly conceptual services or highly conceptual propositions on the telephone, or perhaps even via webinar. So think about it. You know, the reflexive response I hear commonly is, "Oh, Justin, you don't understand. You can't sell what we do by telephone because it's complex or because it's conceptual." Well, guess what? If you give it a go, you may be surprised, as we were, what the consequences are. So the activity level's gone up. We have 2 people in the field, flat out, doing 20 appointments a week each. So that's 4 a day, 5 days a week. And they do nothing other than face-to-face appointments. And we're comfortable that we can guarantee that they're going to be busy because, of course, we've reduced the size of the field force to the point where we only have 2 full-time dedicated field-based salespeople. So it's kind of easy to keep them busy. And then we have an inside team of 3 people performing collectively 300 calls a week, which is not that many a day if you do the maths. The reality is you can get a lot more than this. But nonetheless, we've seen a significant increase in the volume of meaningful selling conversations. It's up to 340. Now, in addition to that, we've seen a reduction in costs. We've seen customer service go up, and we've seen a big rise in sales activity. So the big rise in sales activity is obvious. The reduction in costs we'll get to in a minute. Let me show you why customer service has improved. Previously, we had roughly the same number of people distributed among regional offices. And we also had very poor integration between sales and production, particularly if this is a technical environment, which it is. Now, in this scenario, we've addressed both of those issues. All of the important decisions are being made by an internal team who, if you're smart, will all sit in very close proximity to one another. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a fun, lively, Zappos-style environment where these people sit close to one another, talk to each other, overhear each other's telephone conversations, and then we're going to find magically that the organization does a surprisingly good job of synchronizing itself. In other words, we get rid of the balkanization problem that existed previously between sales and between sales regions, I should say, and between production and sales. And of course, customer service people here are kind of imposters. Customer service people, you could think of them as technical people or production people on permanent loan to sales. So the role of customer service reps, or one of the benefits of intermingling customer service reps with inside salespeople and executive assistants, is that that enables any conflict between sales and production to be resolved in real time as it occurs. Okay, so let me show you a side-by-side comparison of these 2 companies, Alpha and Bravo. Headcount hasn't changed a huge amount. It actually went down slightly in the case of Bravo, and I probably would have been happy to see it go up a little. Didn't work out that way. But in many cases, headcount will go up. But on the next line, payroll has gone down, and always payroll cost will go down. So whenever we help an organization, or whenever an organization helps themselves to make this transition, the payroll costs associated with the sales function will always drop, simply because internal people are significantly cheaper than external people, assuming the same level of capability. Now, let me stress that point. Particularly our UK clients keep talking to me about telemarketers when I'm talking about inside sales. And I have to keep on reminding them that inside sales does not mean telemarketers. The English, for whatever reason, have this obsession with telemarketers. We do not work with any clients that have telemarketers, and we do not condone telemarketers because we don't have any situations, or none of our clients have situations where it really makes sense to have 17-year-old drug addicts on the phone making thousands of calls a day. What we're talking about here is capable, well, they're not all drug addicts. What we're talking about here is capable salespeople. The only essential difference, or the essential difference, is that they're inside as opposed to outside. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you take your existing salespeople, most of whom probably spend much of their time inside, if you follow them around and check where they actually are, whether it's inside in your office or inside in a home office, and you give those salespeople a choice. You can come inside or you can stay out, but if you stay out, you're going to do 20 appointments a week, week in, week out, and you're going to travel pretty much every week, or certainly every second week. You'll be surprised to discover that many of your salespeople would rather come in than stay out, if that's the choice. Which is kind of surprising, because all along you probably thought of them as field salespeople, and they probably thought of themselves as field salespeople too. Now, we've seen an increase, as I mentioned before, in customer service quality, and the most obvious manifestation of that is a dramatic reduction in lead times. Now, here's something that we discover over and over again. When we go into organizations and we say, what's your current quotation lead time, or RFQ lead time? What's your current issue lead time in customer service? Either they don't know, or if they do know, what we discover is that the number is being expressed in days, which leaves me gobsmacked. There are very few environments where it makes sense to measure your quotation lead time in days, because in most cases, customers would like to see quotes in a lot less than a number of days. So what we need to do is to restructure customer service and restructure all the procedures in customer service and engineering, perhaps, so that even complex proposals can be turned around in hours. So we track lead times for both proposals and issues in hours and minutes, work hours and work minutes, not in days. So obviously what I'm getting at here is we're going to turn them around faster, but not a little bit faster, not incrementally faster, but significantly faster. We're going to slash lead times, and it's not that hard to do when you pay some attention to it. Whoops. What's going on here? Okay, so the bottom line is costs are down by 26%, sales activities up by 67%, and we're not including the cost of closing down all those regional offices, and we're not taking into account the costs associated with perhaps using a third-party logistics provider to carry inventory or to handle inventory if previously you had stock in those offices. And we're not counting the cost of the increased travel that your two national salespeople are doing. And let me tell you something. My experience closing regional offices, and we love to close regional offices. I dance a little jig every time I get an opportunity to convince someone to close down regional offices. The cost savings associated with closing regional offices are enormous. And in some cases, it's not just the fact that you get to give back the lease, but you discover that there's a layer of management that's being maintained simply to manage the interface between head office and regions, particularly in larger organizations, that all of a sudden you have no requirement for. Okay, so what I want to do with that picture clear in your heads of the difference between before and after, or the difference between alpha and bravo. And by the way, you can think of it as, what we're talking about here as a road that diverges. Once you go down the sales process path, you come to a fork in the road, and one fork takes you off in the direction of what I call the go-get-'em-tiger approach, and the other fork takes you off in the direction of SPE. And the two roads start close together and diverge because of the fact that there are very innocent-sounding there's a very innocent-sounding difference in the assumptions that underpin the two approaches. But when you adopt either the first or the second set of assumptions and pursue them, you end up going in a completely different direction. So a typical sales function is designed based upon an assumption that sales is a salesperson's responsibility, and a salesperson should operate autonomously. And the environments that we build are based upon an assumption that sales should be a team sport, and that the salesperson should be a part of a centrally managed, tightly integrated team. So when you start with those two different assumptions, you may start off in a similar place, but let me tell you, you diverge rapidly, and the Alpha Bravo example is an example of that, or is evidence of that. Okay, so let me introduce you to outsourced sales operations. In short, the proposition is really, really simple. what we're proposing to do is to transition your organization from looking like Alpha to looking like Bravo. I mean, that's really it. And we spent years and years at Ballistix trying to figure out how to get organizations to make that transition effectively. And I've got to say, in the early days, our results weren't, fantastic. On many occasions, we succeeded in spite of ourselves, and on other occasions, to be honest, we failed despite best efforts. But over the years, we've gotten pretty good at being able to transition organizations at a reasonable pace to that end state, and to do so without incurring a lot of collateral damage. So the specifics of, or the technical description of what we do is design, build, and supervise sales functions, or more commonly, we will redesign, re-engineer, and then continue to supervise your sales function. Now, where supervision is concerned, that means maintaining it the way it's meant to look and the way it's meant to operate, and then embarking on a process of ongoing improvement, which means over time finding new stuff to make better. Taking one specialist proposal person in the customer service team as your organization grows and converting it into a self-contained little bid team or proposal team, for example, is something that commonly happens. So that's what we do. And as part of that, we provide some of the critical inputs into the sales function. So we provide our clients with all of the sales-related technology, all of the promotional collateral that's required for the sales function to work properly, and with recruitment and training. So that's the elevator pitch, if you like. Here's a nice way of visualizing the way we work with organizations. So up the top here, we have your organization. And on the left here, we have strategy. So strategy is just a document detailing what we're trying to achieve via what process. Strategy is the output of a workshop I'll get to in a minute called a solution design workshop. I travel, sit with organizations, work with their team, and over a 2-day period create a really detailed blueprint for what we want their sales function to look like at some point in the reasonably near term, and we create a transition plan to get there. Now, the next element is a ballistics consultant. So we have a small team of consultants in 2 locations, Chicago and Brisbane. The consultants in those locations work with clients all over Australia and in New Zealand and in the UK and North America. Our consultants are dedicated ballistics employees, and they work hands-on with our clients, with the organization here, to execute the strategy. Now, single-handedly, that would be a tough call. So what we have behind all of our consultants is 3 decent-sized resource pools, very capable resource pools. And the capabilities are in 3 parts: creative, in other words, promotional collateral; technology, sales-related technology; and recruitment. So what happens is our clients essentially rent the capacity of our consultants, and then we throw in unlimited access to the output of these 3 teams here. So that's it in a nutshell. So what I want to do now is tell you the price. And I'll tell you, after I tell you the price, why I'm starting with the price. It's an important lesson. I said I was going to try and throw in some tips for the do-it-yourselfers who are on the call here, and this will be one of them. So here's the price. So engagements start typically with a solution design workshop. They come in 2 variants, a 1-day or a 2-day. The 2-day is $8,800 plus travel and living expenses. And as I said, that involves me on premise with you and your team, commandeering your boardroom, lots of really tough, difficult work. And the great thing about the solution design workshop is that, if you include your senior team, which you really must, you end up with them working together with me to build or to design the end state. And as a consequence, they end up really bought into to what we're doing here. And then after the solution design workshop, a percentage, not all, ARCA was an example of one that didn't, but a good percentage, I should say, of organizations roll into what we call our outsourced sales operations engagement. That was what I was profiling for you on the previous slide, and that costs $7,700 a month plus travel and living. In other words, if a consultant's going to be on site and they have to fly there, then unfortunately you've got to pick up the cost of the airfare and the accommodation. Terms are pretty flexible. There's no minimum term. There's no maximum term, of course. We obviously like to retain clients as long as it makes sense to do so. And we found that switching from projects, which used to be our old model, to this engagement model, uh, has resulted in much, much, much more productive relationships with organizations. Because in some cases, the project model imposed on everyone quite an unrealistic finish line that resulted in all sorts of peculiar behavior, much of which really wasn't in the best interests of anyone. There's a 2-month notice to terminate that applies to both parties. So obviously what would happen here is if we weren't getting any traction in your organization, you would terminate. And by the same token, if we aren't making any if we aren't getting any traction in your organization, we will also terminate. So I think the way that the agreement's designed keeps both parties honest. We need to maintain a sensible velocity where change management is concerned. And you guys do too, because obviously we don't want to be working on engagements where we're not producing any benefit. We'd rather swap our consultants across to another engagement. And really that's it where terms are concerned. So on the very next slide, I want to go into detail on the components of our outsourced sales operations engagement. But first I have an offer for you. Actually, before I talk to you about the offer, let me tell you why I told you the price first. So oftentimes I go on calls with salespeople, and one thing that baffles me with salespeople is that they leave it to the end of the presentation of a product or presentation of a product. I've been here too long. And then they tell potential customers what the price is, and that's really dumb. The reason it's really dumb is that all of the feedback that customers have been giving you through the entire sales presentation is meaningless if they don't know what the price is. In other words, if I've told you right at the beginning of this sales presentation that outsourced sales operations cost $7,700 a month, and halfway through the presentation I say to you, well, what do you think about this? And you give me feedback. You are giving me feedback cognizant of the costs. So you're in a position where you can actually make, and you are making, whether you realize it or not, a value judgment. But if you don't know the price, you're incapable of making a value judgment, meaning that the feedback I get from you is less relevant. So the trick is tell people the price right up front, and then you have the rest of the sales presentation to justify it, rather than leaving it as a nasty little surprise, a sting in the tail for the end. You would think that was obvious, but I see salespeople making this mistake over and over. Okay, so an offer. Here's another tip. Whenever you run a webinar, your offer, there should always be a call to action, of course, but your offer should always be in the middle of the webinar, just before some appealing, juicy content, not at the end. If you do it at the end, half the people on your webinar have signed off before you've had a chance to articulate it. So the offer is an opportunity to save $8,800, which sounds almost unbelievable, but let me explain how it works. So I'm suggesting that you commit to an outsourced sales operations engagement with Ballistix in the next 7 days, which is one hell of an ask. But there's $8,800 on the line. So the proposition is that if you do that, we will conduct the 2-day solution design workshop for no additional fee. So what happens is, if you commit to an engagement in the next 7 days, your first month's commitment is $7,700, and it's that thereafter. Normally, you would have already done a solution design workshop with us in advance and paid $8,800 for it. But what I'm proposing to do is to roll the solution design workshop into the first month's worth of work. And in addition to that, I'm offering to give you the opportunity to cancel with no penalty at the end of month 1. So what the bottom line is that the worst case, in other words, if you do the solution design workshop and decide not to continue with the outsourced sales operations engagement, you've just saved $1,000. However, the best case is if you do the solution design workshop and decide to continue with the engagement, then you've saved the whole $8,800. So if you're interested in that, all you have to do is signal your interest by requesting a copy of the outsourced sales operations agreement, a simple plain English agreement. I'll send you a copy of it. And you can do that by clicking yes on the next slide. And remember, you have 7 days from today to take advantage of that offer. And if you're interested, all you have to do is click yes here. So I'm going to leave this slide up for 5 seconds, and then we'll go on with the rest of the webinar. 5, 4, 3, 2, that got you clicking 1. There we go. So let's carry on. So let me walk through in a little more detail the components of our outsourced sales operations engagement. Well, first is a solution design workshop. Normally this precedes an engagement, but in this case we're offering to bundle it in. So as I said before, it involves me in person, in your boardroom, with your senior people. Um, um, I come with my data projector and a copy of Microsoft Visio, one of my favorite software applications, and we use your wall or your screen as a virtual whiteboard. And what we do for those 2 days is really detailed planning. We build a model for how we believe a model of how we believe your sales function should look in the not too distant term, in the next 6 months. And we map all of your workflows, and we make all of the critical decisions that need to be made relating to technology, promotions, and so on and so on and so on. And then when we're done with that, the next thing that we do is build a transition plan. In other words, we figure out how to transition you there as quickly as it makes sense without the risk of collateral, or with minimal risk of collateral damage. As I said, you have your senior team involved, and because I've been running these workshops for probably 6 or 7 years now, we just do a great job of getting team members to buy in and get excited. In addition to that, actually, I should say that the solution design workshop is a part of what we call strategy, and strategy is one of the components of our engagement, or your engagement. So after the solution design workshop, we have periodic planning days, which are really like one-day versions of the solution design workshop, where I rock up again with a data projector and with Visio, and we do some additional strategizing. It may be that we've decided to build the bid team that we were talking about previously, and we want to map it all out. And then in addition to that, we have periodic, generally quarterly, engagement review calls, where I meet in a conference call and we review the progress in the last quarter. The bottom line, though, is that if you have a requirement for strategy, you have unlimited access to me, because in our engagements, I'm the strategy person. Now, the question I get asked about strategy and about our other service offerings is, what stops clients from abusing it? And the answer to that question is there's no reason to abuse it. If I was to come and visit with you and your management team and come up with an exciting plan, you would probably want that plan executed. And when you rolled up your sleeves and got stuck into the execution of it, the last thing that you would need is more strategizing. In fact, additional strategy would probably get in the way of execution. So the bottom line is, once the critical questions have been answered, the designing's been done, most of our clients, and our consultants too for that matter, don't have a lot of requirement for me unless they discover that one of our starting assumptions was flawed, in which case we'll revisit it ASAP. So the next component, of course, is our consultants. So our consultants are all full-time employees of Ballistix, no contractors under any circumstances. They're all young and bright. They all have a lot of experience implementing SPE. We recruit our consultants slowly, and we have them work with existing consultants until they become capable. We're very, very careful where our consultants are concerned, because obviously if we had individuals who weren't capable, everything would fall apart. All of our consultants have some prior experience. Some of them have had their own businesses. Mark on the right had built and sold a business quite successfully. Others have experience in marketing, particularly direct marketing. So they might have worked they've worked in an area where they've been exposed to online marketing or even traditional direct marketing. And also we have a couple of consultants who've worked with call centers or with inside sales teams. In a couple of cases I'm thinking of, our consultants have run pretty sizable, pretty high pressure inside sales environments, which is great for us, because building and running those environments is like training at altitude. We do not build high pressure internal sales environments, but we do build functional internal sales environments, and experience there is very valuable. So that's our team of consultants who we're very proud of and who do just unbelievable work. Now, when you engage with us, you get 25% of one of our consultants' capacity. Now sometimes people do the maths in an effort to impress me with their mathematical skills, I'm sure, and repeat back to me that, well, what that means is they're getting 10 hours of consultants' capacity, and I'm not very comfortable with that formulation, because it doesn't really work that way in practice. None of our consultants work fixed hours. There's a huge range. In other words, the range is greater than the mean, if you like, where the amount of time our consultants spend with each client is concerned. And to say, well, you get 10 hours a week is kind of disingenuous, because it makes it sound like there's a clock ticking somewhere, and when 10 hours is up, they're gone. The reality is that our consultants work, very flexible hours. They have enormous freedom to work their own hours, and they're completely unencumbered by the kind of operational junk that most consulting firms labor their team members with. So they have enormous flexibility to do whatever is required to build our client sales functions. And I've got to say, in many, many cases, our consultants are easily more excited about their consultant sales functions than often the clients are themselves, which of course is a problem that we're always grappling with. But there's certainly never a lack of enthusiasm, and our consultants all have a do what it takes type approach. And any of you who've interacted with them in the past, I suspect some of you here will know what I'm talking about. So the next subject is technology. We have a technology team that's a reasonable sized team. It's run by a long-term Ballistix team member, full-time team member in Sydney called Hema, and we have the team's broken into sort of three categories. We have development people who work on our online management information system. We have integration people who focus simply on integrating it with our clients' CRMs and with our CRM. And we also have a few PHP specialists who work predominantly on CRM. In other words, building improvements to the various CRMs that are around the place. So the components of technology. If a client of ours doesn't have an enterprise class CRM, which means if they don't have one at all, or if they have a clunky sort of old-fashioned client server thing that isn't really fit for purpose, ACT, for example, what we will do is provide them with our own CRM or give them the option to go and buy one of a few recommended CRMs. The big advantage of ours, which happens to be our own customized version of vTiger, which is an open source CRM, is that it's free, and the fact that it's been customized over the last few years to suit the oftentimes peculiar needs of organizations who are going down this path. Generally, we have people at free. Now, if you want to go and spend good money on a CRM, there are a couple of really good options. So we have a short list of 3 that we recommend, and we stretch to 4 on special occasions. So number 1 has to be Salesforce. Salesforce is absolutely the Rolls-Royce of CRM. The only problem with Salesforce is that, of course, Salesforce charges like Rolls-Royce does. It's really, really expensive, and it doesn't look expensive to begin with, because I think they'll talk about $50 or $60 per user per month. But what you quickly discover is that in order to integrate Salesforce with other things, you have to have enterprise licenses, and everyone in your organization needs to have an enterprise license. To give you some idea, we're an organization with about 20 full-time equivalents in it. And when I did the maths, when we were looking at changing CRMs recently, we discovered that it was going to cost us $20,000 a year to upgrade to Salesforce. So Salesforce is a beautiful application. It's extremely extensible. It's very powerful. It's sexy as hell. But $20,000 a year is just absurd. vTiger costs us nothing. And for $20,000 a year, we could afford to have probably 2 decent quality developers working for us in India, continually customizing it. So we elected not to spend $20,000, and instead, you guessed it, to employ 2 very capable software engineers in India who have been working with us ever since on the continual customization of vTiger. And I think that if you take vTiger the way we deliver it and compare it with Salesforce the way that Salesforce delivers it, out of the box, notionally speaking, vTiger is significantly more functional. So Salesforce is an option. Now, don't get me wrong, we will always jump up and down and get excited if clients of ours buy Salesforce, because our consultants love working in it. It's a great application. The other option is Microsoft CRM. And if your environment is Microsoft through and through, particularly if you have Microsoft engineers working on site, Microsoft CRM makes a lot of sense because it integrates so deeply with SharePoint and the other Microsoft enterprise applications. So when I say if you're a Microsoft organization, I don't mean if you use Office. I mean if you've embraced the other Microsoft enterprise applications, then the advantage of Microsoft CRM is it integrates quite deeply with them, and in that context it makes sense. Also, it's relatively inexpensive. Our preference our general preference is vTiger, and I've got to say, when you consider that it costs nothing because it's open source and we host it for all of our clients, it just makes a hell of a lot of sense. In addition to CRM, we have our own proprietary management information system that we plug into the back of all of our clients' CRMs, regardless of what CRM it is. And that business intelligence tool is used to run all sales meetings and to support important decisions in and around sales. In addition to that, we have a suite of other existing tools and services, some of which we've licensed from vendors. In other words, we've paid bulk rates for, and we provide at no additional cost to our clients. So things like lead management, email broadcast. Lead management means things like the provision of easy-to-edit forms for landing pages, the management of online lists, the management of online autoresponders, a certain amount of automation, all that tricky online marketing stuff we provide. Broadcast email, we help our clients with document automation, particularly the automation of proposals, which is something that organizations are really terrible at for no good reason, because the Microsoft Office products are so easy to automate with just a little bit of understanding of how that works. And we also build custom management information tools for customer service environments, for project coordination environments, and for other organizations like that. So that's technology, some examples. Here's a nice illustration. So you're looking at a screen from vTiger, and a nice illustration of one of the things we've been able to do with vTiger. There's actually a plugin for Salesforce now that does roughly this, but for quite some time our clients have had access to what we call geo searches in vTiger, meaning that they can put a sales coordinator can put a location in and call up a list of opportunities in the general vicinity of that location, which helps enormously if you're scheduling a remote salesperson's calendar. So that's something that we discovered that we had a requirement for, and we plugged it in a couple of days later, and then bang, people have access to it. And there's been literally hundreds of little instances where we've done that. And I say hundreds because we have a script that whenever we deploy a new instance of vTiger, whether we're hosting it or sometimes our UK clients tend to host it themselves because of the bandwidth problems there, we will run that script and load all of the updates, and it's literally hundreds of updates. The management information system looks like this. For those of you who have experience in manufacturing, if you're starting to suspect, or if you start to suspect when you look at these diagrams that this is built along manufacturing or production management principles, you'd be absolutely correct. So you're looking at here at little gauges showing the sizes of critical queues of work in process. So the top one here is showing us how many days worth of appointments are pre-scheduled for salespeople, how many days worth of sales opportunities are queued up behind inside sales and sales coordinators, and how many days worth of prospects have been researched by the research analysts ready for campaigns to be broadcast. Now, these gauges are so important because we're talking about work in process in a knowledge environment. And in knowledge work environments, of course, work in process, unlike in production environments, is invisible. So unless we go to special effort to make it visible, it ain't visible. And none of the off-the-shelf CRMs, including the 3 that I've mentioned, and any others that you could possibly think of to mention, actually give you the ability to map these queue sizes out of the box. For all of them, you'd have to add some additional data capture in order to have the requisite data sets in order to generate these gauges. Then when it comes to, then in sales meetings, our clients will get a little more granular, and we have these run charts that show, and I'm just going to give you an example of a few of the, quite a large number of reports in our management information system. We have a handful here that show throughput at various points in the process. Here we're looking at the productivity of a salesperson. The blue line represents the productivity of the specific salesperson we're looking at here. The 2 red lines represent the mean of the team. In other words, the average performance of the team, plus or minus 20 points. So you can see in this case, I've chosen a salesperson who happens to be outperforming by a significant margin his team members. I say his because I know exactly who he is. And in a situation like that, of course, you and your team would sit and look at this data and figure out why it is the way that it is, and figure out how you can take these superior results and transfer them to other salespeople. So the point that I want to make is that we're talking about moving away from sales meetings being a subjective pitch session to a constructive, objective discussion of the nature of reality. We have So they're the technology examples. I could talk all day just about technology. So the next component of services we provide are promotional services. So we have a creative team that we've had now for probably about 20 years. Not all the people are the same as they have been for 20 years, but a couple are, I'm happy to say. And in that team, we create traditional collateral, so brochures, sales letters, advertisements, and so on. We do a significant amount of web work. Probably most of our work nowadays is web work, websites, landing pages, microsites, as well as pay-per-click and SEO. Video editing and multimedia. Video has become so important with the rise of the internet, but we're still big fans of traditional TV when it makes sense. And we also assist with promotional strategies. So if we click through some examples, you'll see there that we're really strong in a couple of areas. One area is salesmanship. You know, you will never have one of our designers begrudge the requirement to include copy, or you'll never have our promotions team ask you for sales copy. We will always write it ourselves because we appreciate the importance of salesmanship. I mean, more than anything else, we're used to being measured on our ability to sell things, or to generate sales opportunities, or to compel action on behalf of your customers. And just on this two-page spread here, you can see this is really salesmanship in print. You know, this is an organization that provides digital screens to, in this case, realtors. And you can see here we've lifted the lid off a real estate firm, and we're painting a picture of an end state if you were to implement this solution through your real estate business exhaustively. The same thing applies to traditional print, to invitations and broadcast email. Here's an invitation to a webinar. It's a very successful event. It's extremely well attended, and it's inviting dealers, owners of car dealerships, to come and learn how to take better photos, which is a subject dear to their heart because auto dealers, more than anyone, know the importance of salesmanship, and they tend to be very canny when it comes to selling in print. And recently, they've been very quick to uptake the internet as a promotional medium. Here's an example of a landing page. For those of you who followed along with direct marketing over the years, direct marketing has really moved online, and I think it's been really fantastic to see a wholesale improvement in business people's understanding of direct marketing as a consequence of that shift online. I love seeing long landing pages, and more than anything, I love seeing traditional, larger organizations running long landing pages, which are kind of the equivalent of old-fashioned long copy, which you saw traditionally only being used by DM companies. In this case, this is a typical landing page. If you scroll down, it goes on and on and on. It has lots of different panels. Each panel has its own headline. It has its own video. It has its own sales copy. And every panel has a button that you can click to request a demo. Same offer repeats all the way through. Here's a more conventional landing page. This is a good insight into our capability. You know, our particular client, a technology company in Long Beach, needed a landing page urgently. And I suggested that we put a video on it. And they said, no, it's too expensive and we don't have time. We need this up in 2 days. We had the landing page up for them in 2 days, complete with a video that was shot from scratch. I hung the phone. Jason and I got in a Google Hangout and wrote the copy together. I was bored and I had some ideas. I wouldn't normally do that, but I did in this case. The very next day, we found a website online that had actors available. We sent the copy through, and we FedExed to them a copy of the book, or a copy of the mock-up of the book. The book didn't exist at the time. While they were shooting the video, our designers back in Australia built the background. We got the video. It was the guy was shot in front of a green screen, so we dropped the green screen out, stuck him on top of the background, and we were able to have a video on this landing page within the 2-day lead time. Now, if you went through a traditional design firm or a video production firm asked for this, they'd be talking to you in thousands of dollars for something like this, and they certainly wouldn't be able to turn something like this around in 2 days. We do this all the time simply because our basis for engagement with organizations gives us that flexibility, and because there's no incentive for our team members to take a small job like this and turn it into a big job. Incidentally, the cost to our client for that exercise was nothing. I think it cost us $380 for the talent, but because the out-of-pocket expense wasn't significant, we didn't pass it on in spite of the fact that technically we could have done. Here's some examples of websites that we've built. We probably go live with 4 or 5 websites a week. Focus on salesmanship always. And that brings me to the last component of outsourced sales operations, and that's recruiting. Now, it's surprising how much organizations spend on recruiting, and as you've probably guessed, like all of our other services, we have an all-you-can-eat approach to recruiting. I mean, the capacity of our consultants puts a natural limit on your consumption of all of our services. But if you look at one of our contracts, there's no limit on the amount that you can consume that notwithstanding. So where recruitment's concerned, we have a couple of benefits. The first one is that we recruit these roles over and over again. You know, customer service reps, inside salespeople, promotional coordinators, research analysts, and so on. We recruit them over and over and over again. So over the years, we've had an opportunity to get really good at knowing exactly where to place the ads in terms of which categories, how to pitch the ads, how to sell the positions, and so on. The other big advantage, though, is that when we talk to young, excited graduates who tend to be or young, smart people, who tend to be the ones we like to recruit for these roles, our consultants are in a position where they can do a really good job of selling the role, selling the end state, which our clients just can't do because in many cases these roles don't exist. So if you have a young, keen candidate who's looking to you to provide answers to probing questions about, well, where will I sit and what will I do? And on Monday morning, if I start with you on Monday, what will I be doing at lunchtime, and so on and so on. The problem that our clients have, particularly early in the engagement, is they can't answer any of those questions. It's very difficult to inspire faith. So we have a shortlisting team who are used to recruiting with these roles, who can answer these questions with confidence. And of course, our consultants do all final interviews, and our consultants really do a splendid job of inspiring a young, oftentimes, what's the word, skittish candidates with confidence. So what I've done is walked you through all of the elements of sales process engineering. Anton, the answer is yes. I'm going to send you a link later today with a recording of this webinar, or a similar one at least. So let me just run through the economics. You remember the cost, of course. I told you that right up front. So the cost of outsourced sales operations is $7,700 a month. And of course, if you commit in the next 7 days, you save the cost of the solution design workshop, which you'd otherwise have to incur. In most cases, however, our engagements are cash flow neutral for clients. And there are 2 reasons why, and you've probably guessed them already. The first reason is that we build lower cost sales functions. In other words, more inside, fewer field-based people, and in most cases, no regional offices. But the other reason is that we tend to displace a bunch of third-party contractors, whether that's designers, PR firms, web shops, SEO people, recruiters, and coaches. Now, it always surprises me when I go into organizations and they say, no, we don't spend much money in these areas. And then I discover they're spending a couple of $1,000s a month with their CRM vendor. They're spending a couple of $1,000s a month with designers. They're spending a couple of $1,000s a month when you average out on recruitment. And then the senior executive has a coach. And the coach is trying to help them with growth. And of course, the coach's approach to growth is to load the senior executives' to-do lists up with a whole bunch of stuff to do that realistically they're never going to do because they don't have time. In a situation like that, you know, we are going to eliminate all of those costs if an organization engages with us, and we are not going to load up managers' to-do lists because we're going to come and work hands-on in the organization to do a bunch of this stuff ourselves. So it's really a great proposition. So typically, with a reasonable sized firm, there's no net cost, pretty much from month 1 onwards. What happens? Well, within the first month or so, you are probably going to see a dramatic improvement in customer service. The first thing we do is fix customer service to make sure that we have a really robust customer service function. That is a prerequisite for everything else. Okay, What I should say is oftentimes when we improve customer service, many times when we improve customer service, we see a tremendous and oftentimes immediate, I shouldn't say tremendous, but a significant and immediate uptick in sales. The next activity from then onwards, though, is to increase sales activity. And we would, in pretty much every case, double the volume of sales activity. In other words, double the volume of meaningful selling conversations within the next 3 to 6 months. So somewhere between 3 months and 6 months, we would double the volume of sales activity. So that's a combination of field appointments and meaningful telephone conversations. So that's an overview of outsourced sales operations and the economics. I'm afraid it's the top of the hour, so we're flat out of time. If you want to type questions in the chat window, I will do my best to answer them for you. I have to dial out now and go into another call, but I will put the I'll put the screen up here. So if you're interested in requesting a copy of the outsourced sales operations agreement, you can click yes. So thank you for joining me. I hope this has been beneficial. If you're doing it yourself, I hope you've picked up some useful tips, and I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar in the series. All the best. Like I said, I'll try and answer some of those questions here after in the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you again for joining me.